The afternoon sun filtered through the dense forest canopy as Troop 118 made their way through the wilderness. Golden light danced across the forest floor, creating patterns that shifted with each gentle breeze. Pine needles crunched underfoot as 20 boys followed a narrow trail deeper into the mountains. Scoutmaster Park adjusted his weathered backpack and checked his compass. His face, tanned from countless outdoor adventures, creased with satisfaction. This annual survival weekend was his favorite tradition. 3 days of teaching the boys to respect nature while learning to thrive within it. "Remember, stay within shouting distance," he called over his shoulder. "We'll make camp before sunset." 13-year-old Tay wiped sweat from his brow. Unlike some of the other scouts who complained about the hike, he loved these weekends away from video games and homework. His father had taught him that the mountains held more wisdom than any classroom. "I'll get kindling for tonight's fire," Tay volunteered, veering slightly off the main path. Scoutmaster Park nodded. "Take Day and June with you. 3 is safer than 1. Tay grinned at his friends. Day, the tallest boy in the troop, was already grabbing a collection bag. June, small but quick-witted, adjusted his round glasses and joined them. The 3 boys moved efficiently through the underbrush, gathering fallen branches and dry pine cones. They'd been friends since kindergarten and moved together like a well-rehearsed team. Tay bent to pick up a promising stick when something caught his eye, a flash of movement about 50 yards deeper in the forest. "Did you see that?" he whispered. Day straightened up. "See what?" "Over there," Tay pointed. Something moved. "Probably just a deer," June suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. Tay felt a strange tingling at the back of his neck. "Let's check it out," he said, moving carefully toward the spot. The boys crept forward, their feet instinctively finding the quietest path through the fallen leaves. As they got closer, Tay spotted something unusual against a moss-covered log. A small figure huddled into itself, trembling. "Over here," Tay called softly to his friends. "Look." They approached cautiously and found a boy, no older than 7, with dirt-smudged cheeks and torn clothing. His dark hair was matted with leaves and twigs, as if he'd been running through the forest for hours. The child's arms were wrapped tightly around his knees, making himself as small as possible. "Hey there," Day said gently. "Are you okay?" The boy's head snapped up, eyes wide with fear. He scurried backward until he hit the fallen log, nowhere else to go. June knelt down, keeping his distance. "We won't hurt you. We're Boy Scouts." Something strange happened then. A shaft of sunlight broke through the trees, illuminating the boy's face. For just a moment, his skin seemed to shimmer with an iridescent quality, like mother of pearl catching the light. Tay blinked, unsure if he'd truly seen it. "I think he's hurt," Tay said, noticing red scratches on the boy's arms. "I'll get Scoutmaster Park." Tay ran back toward the main group, his heart pounding. Something about this felt important, bigger, than finding a lost hiker or an abandoned campsite. Within minutes, he returned with Scoutmaster Park and several other curious scouts. Scoutmaster Park approached slowly, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. 20 years of leading boys through these mountains had taught him to read situations quickly. This was unlike anything he'd encountered before. "Everyone stay back," he instructed the gathering scouts. "Give him space." The scoutmaster knelt, a few feet from the boy, making himself less intimidating. "Hello there, I'm Scoutmaster Park. These boys are from my troop. We are camping in these woods. Are you lost?" The boy's gaze darted between the faces surrounding him. His clothing was unlike typical hiking gear, a one-piece garment made from material that seemed too thin for the mountain air. Yet he wasn't, shivering despite the cooling evening temperature. When the boy didn't respond, Scoutmaster Park tried again. "We have food and water back at our camp. You look like you could use some help." The boy's focus suddenly shifted to something behind. To them. Something deep in the forest that none of them could see. A look of pure terror crossed his face. That's when it happened. The strange boy looked straight at Scoutmaster Park, his eyes reflecting the dying sunlight in a way that was decidedly not human. He whispered 4 words that sent chills down their spines. "They're coming for me." A distant sound, like metal scraping against stone, echoed through the trees. The birds went silent, Even the wind seemed to pause. Tay felt goosebumps rise on his arms. "Who's coming?" he asked. The boy pointed toward the sky. "Hunters, from beyond your stars." Scoutmaster Park's expression remained calm, though Tay noticed his hand tighten around his walking stick. "Well then," the Scoutmaster said with surprising steadiness, "we'd better get you somewhere safe." The boy hesitated, then reached out a small hand. When Scoutmaster Park took it, a faint blue glow pulsed briefly where their skin touched. Several scouts gasped. "What's your name?" asked Tay. "Bin," the boy replied softly. "My designation is Explorer Bin." As Scoutmaster Park lifted the child, something metallic fell from Bin's pocket, a small disc with strange symbols that glowed with soft blue light. June picked it up carefully. "Put that back," Bin said urgently. "It's how they track me." In the distance, the strange metallic sound grew louder. Something large was moving through the forest, snapping branches and crushing undergrowth. "Back to camp now," Scoutmaster Park ordered, his voice firm but controlled. "Quick and quiet. Tay, Day, June, lead the way." As the scouts hurried back toward their campsite, Tay glanced over his shoulder at the mysterious boy in Scoutmaster Park's arms. For a brief moment, the forest behind them lit up with an eerie purple glow. Whatever was hunting this strange child, Tay knew their weekend adventure had just become something much more dangerous and much more important. Back at camp, the scouts moved with purpose, setting up a protective circle around their unexpected guest. Scoutmaster Park had given clear instructions: keep the fire low, post lookouts, and maintain quiet. The usual evening chatter and laughter were replaced by hushed whispers and watchful eyes scanning the darkening forest. Bin sat on a fallen log near the small campfire, his small frame engulfed by a thermal blanket Scoutmaster Park had wrapped around his shoulders. The boy's eyes reflected the dancing flames in an unnatural way, catching and holding the light a moment too long. Tay approached carefully, holding a steaming mug of hot chocolate. "Here," he offered. "This might help. It's hot, so be careful." The boy's hands trembled as he accepted the drink. His fingers were too slender, the joints more flexible than seemed natural as they wrapped around the warm cup. After a cautious sip, his eyes widened with surprise. "This contains cacao," he said, his accent slight but noticeable. "We have similar plants on Nara." The scouts exchanged glances at the casual mention of another world. Scoutmaster Park sat down across from Bin, his weathered face calm despite the extraordinary situation. "You're safe here for now," he assured the boy. "Can you tell us what happened? Who you are?" Bin looked into the fire, the flames reflecting in his eyes. "I'm Bin," he finally said. "My parents were researchers." He took another sip of hot chocolate, seeming to draw strength from the simple human comfort. "They studied developing worlds." As evening settled fully over the camp, the forest grew quiet except for the occasional hoot of an owl. Stars appeared, overhead brilliant and clear in the mountain air. Bin looked up at them with a mix of longing and fear. "That one," he pointed to a star that shone with a slightly bluish tint, barely distinguishable among thousands. "That's my sun, my home." Day squinted up at the sky. "That's impossible. Even the closest stars are light years away." Bin shook his head. "Distance works differently when you understand fold space." He touched the strange device they'd found earlier, now placed safely beside him on the log. "This helps navigate the paths between stars." As the scouts gathered closer, Bin revealed his truth. He wasn't from Earth, but from a planet called Nara. His people looked nearly identical to humans, except for their slightly iridescent skin and enhanced perception. "We've been watching Earth for centuries," Bin explained. "Your people are like our ancestors were long ago. My parents' research team was documenting your development." "You mean we're being studied? Like animals in a zoo?" June asked, adjusting his glasses nervously. Bin shook his head quickly. No, with respect. To learn, and maybe someday when you reach the stars on your own, to welcome you." His voice grew softer. "My parents believed Earth people have great potential." "So what? Went wrong?" Tay asked, sensing the story's darker turn. Bin's face clouded. He stared into his nearly empty cup, the steam no longer rising. 3 days ago, our ship was in orbit, hidden from your satellites. My parents were recording data when another ship appeared. He swallowed hard. Much bigger than ours, black with red markings. Our ship was studying Earth when they attacked, Bin explained, his voice breaking. The alarms were so loud everyone was running, his small hands clenched around the mug. My father grabbed me. My mother was at the controls trying to send a distress signal. They put me in an escape pod meant for emergencies. Tears welled in his eyes. The last thing I saw was my father's face as the pod door closed. Then I was falling toward Earth. Through the pod's window, I saw their ship explode. He made a gesture with his hands. Gone in a flash of light. Scouts sat in stunned silence. Several of the younger boys had edged closer to Scoutmaster Park, seeking the comfort of his steady presence. Who attacked you? Scoutmaster Park asked gently, his voice steady despite the fantastical story. The hunters, Bin whispered, the word, itself seeming to chill the air around the campfire. They're from a system your people haven't named yet. They destroy peaceful worlds. But why? Asked Tay. Resources, territory, power. Bin listed the reasons with a weary knowledge beyond his years. But mostly because they can. Their technology is advanced even beyond my people's. They use biomechanical enhancements, part living, part machine. Bin set his empty cup down and pulled something from his pocket, a small holographic projector no bigger than a marble. When he placed it on his palm, a three-dimensional image appeared above it. A tall, armored figure with a helmet that obscured any features. The armor itself seemed alive, with segments that shifted and reconfigured as the figure moved. They're mostly organic underneath, Bin explained, but their battle suits bond with their nervous systems. The suits can repair themselves and adapt to different environments. Like the forest, June realized. That's why they can track you so easily, Bin nodded. The suits have sensors more advanced than anything on Earth. They can detect heartbeats from a kilometer away, analyze atmospheric changes from a single breath. And they're after you because, Scoutmaster Park prompted. Knowledge, Bin said, simply. My parents were senior researchers. The data they collected is valuable and, he hesitated, touching his temple. Some of it is stored here in my neural implant. The hunters will extract it, even if that means... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond their camp. Everyone froze. Scoutmaster Park raised his hand for silence, then motioned for the scouts to move closer together. After a tense moment, a raccoon waddled into the firelight, regarded them with curious eyes, then disappeared back into the underbrush. The collective sigh of relief was audible. They're still far away, Bin assured them, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. The crash damaged their ship, but they have recovery pods like mine. 3 hunters, maybe 4. They'll be tracking my pod's signal. Is there anyone who can help? Asked Day. Other people from your world? Bin's shoulders slumped. If my mother's distress signal reached Nara, help might come, but it would take days, even using fold space. By then nothing, Tay said firmly, surprising even himself with his conviction. Because we're going to help you. Scoutmaster Park gave Tay a measured look, not discouraging but cautious. This is beyond anything we've trained for, Tay. But not beyond what you've taught us, Tay insisted. Being brave, helping others, working together. Isn't that what being a scout means? One by one, the other boys nodded. Even the youngest scouts straightened their shoulders, faces set with determination despite their fear. Bin looked around at their faces, illuminated by firelight, and for the first time since they'd found him, something like hope flickered across his features. My people have a saying, he told them softly. The strongest ships are not built of metal, but of trust. Scoutmaster Park nodded slowly, decision made. Then we'd better start building. He reached for his map. First, we need to know what we're up against, and then we need a plan. Bin, tell us everything you can about these hunters. As Bin began describing the capabilities of the alien pursuers, Tay looked up at the stars, countless points of light in the vast darkness. Somewhere up there, worlds lived and died, Creatures fought and loved, stories unfolded beyond human imagination. And somehow, incredibly, their small scout troop had become part of one of those stories. Whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same. That night, strange lights pulsed between the clouds. The scouts huddled around their small, carefully hidden fire, speaking in whispers as they looked up at the eerie glow. It wasn't like lightning or airplane lights. The colors shifted from deep purple to a sickly green, moving with purpose rather than drifting with the wind. Bin stared at the lights with growing terror. "Search drones," he whispered. "They're scanning the forest." As if responding to his words, every electronic device in the camp died simultaneously. Phones went black. Scoutmaster Park's emergency radio emitted a final screech before falling silent, and even June's digital watch stopped displaying numbers. "They're using a pulse field," Bin explained, his voice barely audible. "It disables your technology so you can't call for help." Tay felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Until now, part of him had still hoped this was some elaborate misunderstanding or prank. But the evidence hovered above them, casting alien shadows through the trees. "They're tracking me," Bin whispered, clutching the small device they'd found with him. "They always find what they hunt. We need to destroy this." "No," Scoutmaster Park said firmly, taking the device gently. "If it's connected to your home, it might be the only way your people can find you too." The scouts gathered close as Scoutmaster. Park unfolded his paper map, thankfully immune to the electronic pulse, and spread it on the ground. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in his face. "We need to move Bin to safety." 14-year-old Han, the troop's navigation expert whose father worked as a forest ranger, pointed to their position on the map. His finger traced a path through the trees. "There's a ranger station 12 miles east. It has a radio system that runs on different frequencies. Maybe it wasn't affected by whatever knocked out our gear." 12 miles, Scoutmaster Park nodded. "We can make it by dawn if we move quickly and quietly. But what if these hunters are between us and the station?" asked Day, voicing what everyone was thinking. "Then we go around them," Scoutmaster Park answered simply. "We know these woods better than they do." Bin looked doubtful. "Their suits have sensors that can detect heartbeats, body heat, even the carbon dioxide we exhale. They're designed for hunting." The scouts exchanged worried glances, but Scoutmaster Park remained calm. "Then we'll need to be smarter than their technology." He pointed to a blue line on the map. "The Blackwater River runs 2 miles north of here. If we wade through it, the moving water might mask our trail." The scouts packed only essential supplies: water, first aid kits, protein bars, and matches. Scoutmaster Park insisted they leave their tents and most of their equipment behind to travel faster. He wrapped Bin's tracking device in several layers of foil from their cooking supplies, hoping it might block any signal. As they prepared to leave, Tay moved to the edge of their small clearing to keep watch. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No owls calling, no rustling of nocturnal animals. Even the insects had gone silent. He scanned the trees, straining his eyes against the darkness. That's when he saw it, a flash of movement about 50 yards away. Too tall and too smooth to be a deer or bear. The figure moved with deliberate precision, pausing occasionally as if scanning the area. A faint red glow emanated from where its face should be. The figure turned slightly, and moonlight reflected off something that looked horribly like a helmet with a reflective visor. 2 more similar shapes materialized from between the trees, moving in a coordinated pattern that was spreading out to surround the camp. Ty's heart hammered against his ribs as he scrambled back to the group. "They're here," he hissed, struggling to keep his voice low. 3 of them coming from the west. "They're surrounding us." Scoutmaster Park didn't hesitate. "Everyone grab your packs. Move east in pairs, stay low, and don't use flashlights. Go now." The scouts didn't need to be told twice. Years of wilderness training kicked in as they moved silently into the dense underbrush, each older scout paired with a younger one. Tay found himself alongside Bin, guiding the alien boy through the darkness. Behind them, a high-pitched whine cut through the night, some kind of scanner or weapon powering up. Bin's grip on Tay's arm tightened painfully. "Keep moving," Tay whispered, 1 foot in front of the other. They navigated by moonlight, 20 boys and one scoutmaster, slipping through the forest like shadows. Whenever a twig snapped underfoot or branches rustled too loudly, everyone froze, holding their breath until it seemed safe to continue. An hour into their escape, the forest floor began to slope downward, leading them into a ravine thick with ferns and moss-covered rocks. The air grew cooler and damper. They were nearing the river. Suddenly, Day, who was on point with Han, raised his fist, the scout signal to stop. Everyone froze. Through the trees ahead, a faint purple light pulsed rhythmically. "One of them is at the river," Day breathed when Scoutmaster Park reached him. "It's just standing there like it's waiting." Scoutmaster Park studied the situation, then pulled out his map again. "There's another crossing 2 miles downstream," he whispered, "but it would take us away from the ranger station. We could split up," suggested Jun, the oldest scout. "Create a diversion." Scoutmaster Park shook his head firmly. "We stay together." Bin tugged at Tay's sleeve, pointing to a rocky outcropping that rose above the ravine. "Up there," he whispered. "Their sensors work best on flat terrain. The rocks and elevation changes might confuse them." It was a risky climb in the dark, but they had little choice. One by one, the scouts began scaling the steep slope, helping each other over difficult sections. The rocks were slick with moss, and more than once, someone nearly lost their grip. But these boys had been trained for this. Many had earned their climbing and wilderness survival badges right in these mountains. Halfway up, a sharp mechanical sound cut through the night, like metal being torn apart. Everyone looked down to see a tall figure stepping into the ravine below, its helmet turning slowly as it surveyed the area. The red glow from its visor swept across the rocks. "Don't move," Scoutmaster Park breathed. "Not a muscle." 21 humans and 1 alien boy clung to the rock face, scarcely daring to breathe. The hunter below took another step forward, then stopped. Something on its armor glowed as it raised an arm, pointing what looked like a weapon at the stones. For an endless moment they were caught, exposed on the vertical face with nowhere to hide. Then, from far across the forest, came a distant crash, followed by an electronic wail. The hunter's helmet swiveled toward the sound. After a tense moment, it lowered its weapon and moved swiftly away, disappearing back into the trees. "What was that?" whispered June. "The emergency beacon I left at camp," Scoutmaster Park explained. "I set it to activate an hour after we left. Looks like our visitor took the bait." They continued climbing with renewed urgency, finally reaching a narrow ridge that overlooked the river valley. From this vantage point, they could see purple and red lights moving through the forest below. 3 distinct groups, all heading back toward their abandoned campsite. "We've bought some time," Scoutmaster Park said, allowing himself a small smile. "But they'll realize the trick soon enough." Bin looked at the scouts with something like wonder. "You outthought them," he said. "No one outthinks the hunters." "First time for everything," Tay replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. They moved along the ridge, keeping low and using the rocky terrain for cover. The night wore on, and the younger scouts were beginning to tire. But with 3 alien hunters behind them, there could be no rest, no hesitation. Dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky when they finally descended back to the forest floor, miles from where they'd started. The ranger station couldn't be far now. Tay helped Bin over a fallen log, noticing how the alien boy's skin seemed less shimmery in the growing light. "Are you okay?" he asked. Bin nodded, though his face was drawn with exhaustion. "My people don't usually move this much," he admitted. "We're researchers, not warriors." "Well, we're Boy Scouts," Tay said with a grin. "Being prepared is kind of our thing." As they pushed through a dense thicket of pines, the forest suddenly opened into a small clearing, and there, like a miracle of human civilization, stood a rustic wooden building with a radio antenna on its roof, the ranger station. But their relief was short-lived. Standing between them and safety was a figure twice as tall as Scoutmaster Park, its biomechanical armor shifting and reconfiguring as it turned to face them. 2 more identical figures emerged from the trees on either side. The hunters had outflanked. "Have them run!" Scoutmaster Park shouted, abandoning all pretense of stealth. "To the station now!" The scouts broke cover, sprinting for the wooden building. The hunters moved with impossible speed, their long strides eating up the distance between them and their prey. One raised an arm, and something that looked horribly like a weapon began to glow. They weren't going to make it. Then Bin did something unexpected. He stopped running, turned, and held up the tracking device they'd found with him. He pulled off the foil, and the small disc began to pulse with brilliant blue light. "Hey!" he shouted. "This is what you want, isn't it?" All three hunters froze, their visors locked on the glowing device. Bin backed away slowly, drawing their attention while the scouts continued running toward the station. "Bin, no!" Tay called, stopping halfway to the building. "Keep going," Bin shouted back. "I'll be okay." The lead hunter took a step toward Bin, its armored hand extending. The boy turned and ran, not toward the station, but back into the forest, leading the hunters away from his human friends. Two of the armored figures pursued Bin immediately. The third hesitated, its visor swiveling between the fleeing alien boy and the scouts. After a moment it too turned and followed its companions into the trees. "We have to help him," Tay insisted, looking desperately at Scoutmaster Park. The Scoutmaster was already moving toward the station door. "We will," he promised. "But first we need to call for backup." By dawn, it became clear they couldn't outrun their pursuers. The ranger station had provided brief sanctuary, but the hunters had surrounded the small wooden building within hours. Scoutmaster Park had managed to send out a distress call, but help, if it was coming at all, would take time they didn't. "Have their circling again," Tay reported from his lookout position at the window. Three armored figures prowled the perimeter, their biomechanical suits shifting and adapting to the terrain. One hunter tested the door, its metal fingers leaving deep gouges in the wood. Bin sat huddled in the corner, his normally shimmering skin dull with exhaustion. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I never meant to bring this to your world." Scoutmaster Park studied his map, tracing a route with his finger. "There's a narrow canyon about 2 miles west of here. Old mining territory." 16-year-old Jun looked over his shoulder. "The Dead Man's Pass? That's dangerous even in daylight." "Exactly," Scoutmaster Park nodded. "Too narrow for their size, with high walls and plenty of loose rocks." Tay understood immediately. "We could set traps." "If we're going to do this, we need to move now," Scoutmaster Park said, checking his watch. They seemed to withdraw slightly at sunrise. Maybe their sensors need recalibration with the changing light. The scouts gathered what supplies they could find in the ranger station: rope, tools, first aid kits, and emergency flares. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, they slipped out the back window one by one and disappeared into the underbrush. True to Scoutmaster Park's prediction, the hunters had pulled back, though their mechanical scanning sounds still echoed through the trees. The scouts moved quickly, with Bin in the middle of their formation. Despite their exhaustion, fear kept them alert and moving. 2 hours later, they reached the entrance to Dead Man's Pass, a narrow gap between towering rock walls that twisted and turned for nearly half a mile before opening into a box canyon. It was a natural fortress, but also a potential trap if they couldn't hold their ground. "We can't keep running," said Jun, wiping sweat from his brow. "We need to slow them down." "Bye. Enough time for help to arrive." Scoutmaster Park nodded grimly. "This is where we make our stand." The scouts worked with practiced efficiency, breaking into teams with different tasks. 12-year-old Wu, the troop's not expert, began constructing tripwires from fishing, line and paracord. Han and Day gathered stones for slings and makeshift catapults. The younger scouts were tasked with setting up a fallback position in the box canyon. Tay and June climbed the canyon walls with Bin between them, searching for loose rocks they could use as ammunition. From their high vantage point, they spotted movement in the forest. 3 armored figures advancing steadily toward the canyon entrance. "They found our trail," Tay called down to Scoutmaster Park. "We knew they would," he replied calmly. "Everyone, to positions. Remember, we're not trying to defeat them, just slow them down." The scouts scattered to their assigned positions, hidden behind rocks or tucked into small crevices in the canyon walls. Bin insisted on helping, showing them how to target the weak joints in the hunter's armor. "Their sensors are in the helmet," he explained. "Dust and debris can temporarily blind them." Minutes later, the first hunter appeared at the canyon entrance. It paused, its helmet swiveling as its sensors analyzed the narrow passage. After a moment's hesitation, it stepped forward into the trap. Jun's carefully rigged system sent a net of vines and heavy branches dropping from above. The hunter's reflexes were inhumanly fast. It nearly dodged the trap, but the weighted edges tangled around its armored legs. As it struggled to free itself, scouts at different positions launched a barrage of stones with their slingshots, aiming for the visor and sensor arrays. The hunter let out an electronic screech, its armored arms flailing as it tried to protect its helmet. The second hunter rushed forward to help, only to trigger Wu's tripwire. It stumbled but didn't fall, its adaptive armor compensating for the uneven footing. "Second wave!" Scoutmaster Park signaled. From higher positions, older scouts rolled larger rocks down the canyon walls, creating a localized rockslide. The hunters deployed energy shields that glowed purple in the morning light, deflecting the smaller debris, but they were forced to retreat several steps. Tay and 3 other scouts ignited emergency flares, the bright magnesium light overwhelming the hunters' sensitive visual sensors. In the confusion, more traps were sprung. Pit traps filled with mud to slow their movement, and snares that, while not strong enough to hold the aliens, tangled their limbs momentarily. The third hunter, apparently the leader, assessed the situation and tried a different approach. Its armor reconfigured, forming what looked like a projectile launcher on its shoulder. It fired, not at the scouts, but at the canyon wall. The impact sent vibrations through the rock, threatening to cause a much larger rockslide than the scouts had planned. "Fall back to position 2, Scoutmaster Park ordered. The scouts retreated deeper into the canyon, leading the hunters through a gauntlet of additional traps and obstacles. Each delay was small, mere seconds against such advanced pursuers, but they were adding up. At the Ow, canyon's narrowest point, Scoutmaster Park had organized the final defense. Using techniques from his military engineering days, he had rigged an elaborate system of counterweights and triggers. The scouts gathered behind a barricade of fallen logs and rocks, slingshots and improvised spears at the ready. "Remember your training," he told them, his voice steady despite the alien hunters less than 100 yards away. "Teamwork is our strength." As the hunters approached the narrowest part of the canyon, Bin studied them with growing confusion. "Something's wrong," he whispered to Tay. "They're moving differently." Tay saw it too. The lead hunter's movements had become less fluid, more mechanical. Its helmet occasionally twitched to one side, as if fighting against a malfunction. The trap at the entrance, Bin realized. We damaged its neural interface. This was their chance. Scoutmaster Park gave the signal and June pulled the trigger cord. Enormous logs suspended from the canyon walls swung down like pendulums, catching the lead hunter mid-stride. The impact sent it crashing into its companions, all 3 tumbling into a heap of tangled limbs and armor. "Now!" Scoutmaster Park shouted. The scouts unleashed everything they had. Stones, spears, flares, and even packets of the ranger station's cayenne pepper mixed with sand to create a disorienting cloud. The hunters struggled to their feet, their coordination visibly impaired. The lead hunter raised its arm, weapon glowing ominously, only to have its systems suddenly power down. The glow faded, and the massive figure froze in place. The other 2 hunters backed away from their companion, their helmets swiveling rapidly as if communicating silently. Then, to everyone's amazement, all 3 hunters began a strategic retreat. They moved backwards out of the canyon, keeping their sensors trained on the scouts, but making no further aggressive moves. "Did we win?" Wu asked, hardly daring to believe it. Bin was staring at the sky. "No," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. They did. Everyone looked up to see a sleek, silver craft descending silently through the clouds above the canyon. Unlike the angular, threatening appearance of the hunter's ship, this vessel had smooth, flowing lines that caught the morning light like polished pearl. "My people," Bin breathed. "They got my parents' message. They came." As the Narration ship descended toward the canyon, the hunters broke their retreat. Their biomechanical armor whirred and clicked as weapon systems came online, targeting the silver craft above. The scouts watched in horror as energy began building in the hunters' weapon arrays. They were preparing to attack Bin's rescuers. Before they could fire, the forest suddenly fell silent. It was an unnatural quiet, as if sound itself was being suppressed. Then came the distinctive chop of helicopter rotors, growing louder by the second. 3 black helicopters appeared over the ridge, unmarked except for a small insignia that looked like a stylized eye surrounded by stars. They hovered in formation, blocking the hunters' line of fire to the Narration ship. A voice boomed through speakers mounted on the helicopters. "This area is under government protection. Stand down immediately. The Q." Hunters hesitated, their helmet sensors swiveling between the helicopters and the alien craft. Men and women in dark uniforms rappelled down from the helicopters, landing in a perfect circle around the hunters. They carried weapons unlike anything the scouts had ever seen, sleek rifles with glowing blue components that hummed with power. "Those aren't standard military," whispered Jun, whose father worked at the Defense Department. "I've never seen tech like that." The standoff stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The hunters' armor shifted and reconfigured, adapting to the new threat, but they were outnumbered. Finally, the lead hunter made a sharp gesture to its companions. Their weapons powered down, and they began backing away toward the forest. A woman, with short gray hair and the bearing of someone used to command, stepped forward from the government team. "Let them go," she ordered. "Track their ship, but do not engage." As the hunters disappeared into the trees, the woman approached the scouts. Makeshift barricade. Despite her age, she moved with the fluid grace of someone half her years. "I'm Director Kang," she said, her voice softer now but still carrying authority. "You boys can come out. You're safe now." Scoutmaster Park emerged first, positioning himself protectively in front of his troop. "Who exactly are you with, Director Kang?" She almost smiled. "A division that doesn't officially exist. We monitor and respond to extraterrestrial activity on Earth." She nodded toward Bin. "Including our visitors from Nara." Bin's eyes widened. "You know about my people?" "We've been aware of Narration observation posts for decades," Director Kang explained. "We've respected your non-interference protocols. Until now, there was no reason for direct contact." The sleek Narration ship had completed its descent, hovering just above the canyon floor. Its surface rippled like liquid metal in the sunlight. A seam appeared along its side, widening into a doorway from which a soft blue light emanated. "Director." Kang turned to the scouts, her expression serious but impressed. "You've done something remarkable today," she told them. "We've been monitoring extraterrestrial activity for decades, but this is our first direct confrontation with the hunters. Most civilizations don't survive their first encounter." "We almost didn't," Tay admitted, looking at the traps and makeshift weapons they'd deployed. "That's why it's remarkable," Director Kang replied. "You found a way to hold off beings with technology centuries beyond your own. That kind of ingenuity is rare in the galaxy." 2 figures emerged from the Narration ship, tall, elegant beings with the same iridescent skin as Bin, but more pronounced. They wore simple grey uniforms with intricate silver patterns that seemed to move across the fabric like flowing water. Bin let out a cry of joy and ran toward them. The taller Narration knelt down, embracing the boy with visible emotion. The scouts couldn't hear their exchange, but the reunion required no translation. Director Kang gave them their moment before approaching the Narratians. Her team maintained a respectful distance, though their weapons remained ready. "The hunters have retreated to their ship," Director Kang informed the Narratians. "Our satellites show them preparing for departure. They've taken heavy damage. Your boy and his friends saw to that." The female Narration stepped forward, her movements graceful despite Earth's stronger gravity. "I am Ambassador Lena," she said, her accent melodic but her English perfect. "We owe you a debt for protecting one of our children." "The hunters were tracking his pod," Scoutmaster Park explained. "We couldn't just leave him." Ambassador Lena studied the scouts with eyes that reflected light like opals. "Such compassion toward a stranger. It confirms much of what our research suggested about humans." Director Kang motioned to her team, who began establishing a perimeter around the canyon. We should move to a more secure location. The hunters may have called for reinforcements. They have, confirmed the male Narration, still holding Bin close. But not to continue the hunt. Our defensive fleet has entered your solar system. The hunters are in full retreat. This news sent ripples of surprise through both the scouts and the government team. Director Kang's composed expression cracked slightly. Your fleet is here? In Earth space? To protect both our worlds, Ambassador Lena assured her. The hunters do not discriminate between targets once they've been discovered. Your planet would have been next. 1 month later, Tay stood with the rest of Troop 118 at a hidden government facility deep in the mountains. The vast underground hangar had been converted into a reception area for this historic day. Military officials in dress uniforms mingled with scientists and diplomats, all gathered to witness humanity's first official contact with an alien civilization. Bin, now dressed in formal Narration attire that shimmered with embedded technology, moved through the crowd toward the scouts. He looked healthier than when they'd found him, his skin glowing with its natural iridescence. My parents wanted me to thank you again, he said, smiling at his friends. Especially you, Tay. You were the first to find me. Lucky coincidence. Tay shrugged, though he felt a swell of pride. No such thing as coincidence, Bin replied with a wisdom beyond his years. The universe brings together those who need each other. A hushed anticipation fell over the gathering as the hangar's massive doors slid open. A sleek ship descended from the clouds, larger and more ornate than the rescue craft, its hull decorated with symbols that glowed with inner light. As the ship settled onto the landing pad, Director Kang approached the scouts. Your parents have been briefed about your involvement, she told them. They're very proud, though understandably concerned about the danger you were in. Are we still sworn to secrecy? Asked Wu, who had been bursting with the desire to tell his friends at school about their adventure. Director Kang almost smiled. Not for much longer. After today, the whole world will know about our new allies. A delegation of 7 Narratians emerged from the ship, led by a distinguished figure whose uniform bore intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story in light and color. This was the High Ambassador, Bin had explained earlier, one of the Narration Council's most respected diplomats. The High Ambassador approached the scouts first, bypassing the assembled world leaders and military commanders. He bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect in Narration culture. These young humans, he announced, his voice carrying throughout the hangar, represent the best of what we have observed in your species: courage, ingenuity, compassion, and loyalty, qualities we value above all others. He turned to address the wider gathering. For centuries we have watched Earth's development, uncertain whether to make contact. Your technology has advanced rapidly, but we needed to know if your wisdom and compassion had kept pace. The High Ambassador gestured to the scouts. These children answered that question when they risked their lives to protect a child, not of their world. They showed us that humanity is ready for the stars. Tay felt a strange mix of embarrassment and pride. They had only done what any decent person would do, what their scout training had prepared them for. Help others, be prepared, show courage. He never imagined those simple principles would change humanity's destiny. As the formal diplomatic proceedings began, Bin slipped back to stand with his scout friends. What happens next? Day asked, watching the Narration delegation present what appeared to be a data crystal to Earth's representatives. Cultural exchange, Bin explained. Medical knowledge, sustainable energy technology, star maps. Will you be going home? Tay asked, suddenly realizing he might be losing his new friend. Bin smiled. Eventually, but my parents have been assigned to the new Narration embassy here, and they've agreed to let me join Troop 118 officially. He pulled out a scout handbook from inside his formal attire. I've already started studying for my first badges. Scoutmaster Park, who had been listening nearby, placed his hand on Bin's shoulder. You've already earned the most important one, he said, presenting Bin with a special patch that had been created just for him. It showed Earth and a distant star connected by a Scout's fleur-de-lis symbol. The Interstellar Friendship Badge, Scoutmaster Park announced. First of its kind. As the scouts gathered around to admire the new badge, The High Ambassador's voice echoed through the hangar's speaker system. Today marks not an end, but a beginning. Together, Narayans and humans will build a bridge between worlds that the hunters and others like them cannot tear down. Tay looked up at the sleek alien ship, its hull shimmering with colors no human craft had ever displayed. Then he looked at his fellow scouts, ordinary kids who had done an extraordinary thing simply because it was the right thing to do. Our next camping trip is going to be really boring after this, Jun joked. I wouldn't count on it, Scoutmaster Park replied with a mysterious smile. I hear the Narayans are offering educational tours of our solar system's outer planets. Might be time for Troop 118 to earn some space exploration badges. The scouts' excited chatter was drowned out by applause as Earth's representatives and the Narayan delegation officially signed the first interstellar friendship treaty. Above them, through the hangar's open roof, stars began appearing in the evening sky, no longer distant and unreachable, but full of promise and new friends. The end.